Every single day, you make thousands of small moves. You decide what to eat the moment you wake up, which route to drive to work, how to react when a colleague snaps at you, and how to spend your evenings. Or at least you think you are making decisions. The terrifying reality is that more than 40% of your daily actions are not decisions at all. They are loops. They are automated programs running silently in the deep, primitive basements of your brain. While you believe you are steering your life with conscious logic, a hidden neural machine is actually calling the shots. This invisible architecture dictates your financial status, your physical health, your career trajectory, and your deepest relationships. But what if you could peer inside this biological motherboard? What if you could hack the code of your automatic behaviors and reprogram them from scratch? What happened to a woman named Lisa Allen proves that when you change a single core pattern, you change your entire destiny.
Welcome to Liberty Listen. If you have ever felt trapped by your own routines, frustrated by a lack of discipline, or puzzled by why you keep repeating the same self-destructive behaviors, you are about to discover the keys to psychological liberation. Today, we are diving into a profound exploration of human behavior, neurobiology, and social dynamics. We will look at how automatic patterns form, why they are nearly impossible to erase, and exactly how they can be systematically rebuilt to serve your highest potential. If you are ready to take conscious control of your mind and design a life of mastery, hit that subscribe button right now. Give this video a like, turn on your notifications, and drop a comment below sharing the one routine you are ready to change today. Let's look at the science of personal transformation.
The dark oval of the mind. To understand why we do what we do, we must first look at a man who forgot everything. In the early 1990s, a man known in medical history as Eugene Pauly suffered a catastrophic brain infection. A rare virus made its way into his skull, chewing through the delicate tissue of his medial temporal lobe with brutal precision. When Eugene woke from his coma, his physical body was miraculously intact. He could look around the room, talk normally, and use his hands. But his memory was completely gone. He did not know his age. He did not recognize his grandchildren. If you left the room for 60 seconds and walked back in, he would introduce himself to you as a complete stranger. His brain was effectively frozen in time. He could not form a single new conscious memory. He could not draw a map of his own house, and he had no idea where the kitchen was located.
Yet, a few weeks after returning home, something bizarre happened. Eugene got out of bed, walked down the hallway, opened the refrigerator, cooked himself a plate of bacon and eggs, ate them, and went back to bed. 40 minutes later, he woke up and did the exact same thing. He didn't remember eating. He didn't know where the kitchen was if you asked him, but his body knew exactly how to find the food. Later, when his wife Beverly lost track of him, she found him walking down the street alone. She panicked. The doctors had warned her that Eugene would get lost instantly because he lacked the mental capacity to navigate. But Eugene simply walked around the block, collected a few pine cones, walked up his own driveway, entered the living room, and sat down to watch television. How could a man who did not know his own address find his way home?
This mystery landed Eugene in the laboratory of Larry Squire, a brilliant professor of neuroanatomy. Squire began running experiments on Eugene, trying to map the boundaries of his broken mind. He gave Eugene a test involving pairs of colored plastic objects. One object in each pair always had a small sticker on the bottom that read correct. Eugene's task was to choose one, turn it over, and see if he was right. Because Eugene had no short-term memory, he couldn't remember a single choice from 1 minute to the next. Every time Squire handed him the objects, Eugene smiled and said it was the first time he had ever seen them. He did this twice a week for months. But here is where the story takes a staggering turn. Over the weeks, Eugene's performance began to climb. At first, his choices were completely
completely random, a 50-50 shot. But after a month, Eugene was picking the right object 85% of the time. By day 36, he was right 95% of the time. Squire asked him, "How are you doing this?" Eugene looked at his own hands, completely bewildered, and said, "I don't know. It's here somehow or another, and the hand just goes for it." Squire realized that the human brain has two completely distinct systems for dealing with experience. One is the conscious memory system, housed in the evolutionary newer parts of our brain, like the prefrontal cortex. This is where we analyze data, store facts, and make deliberate choices. This was the system the virus had destroyed in Eugene. But beneath that modern neocortex lies an ancient, golf ball-sized lump of tissue that we share with fish, reptiles, and primitive mammals, the basal ganglia. Squire asked him, "How are you doing this?" Eugene looked at his own hands, completely bewildered, and said, "I don't know. It's here somehow or another, and the hand just goes for it." Squire realized that the human brain has two completely distinct systems for dealing with experience. One is the conscious memory system, housed in the evolutionary newer parts of our brain, like the prefrontal cortex. This is where we analyze data, store facts, and make deliberate choices. This was the system the virus had destroyed in Eugene. But beneath that modern neocortex lies an ancient, golf ball-sized lump of tissue that we share with fish, reptiles, and primitive mammals, the basal ganglia. This ancient structure does not deal in facts, logic, or conscious awareness. It deals in patterns. It is a biological storage unit for automated routines. Eugene was not remembering which plastic object was correct. His basal ganglia had simply built an automatic pathway. The visual sight of the objects triggered a physical reaction in his hand, which led to the psychological payoff of success. What Eugene proved to the scientific community is that a behavior can become completely automatic, even when the conscious mind has zero awareness of it. You don't need a functioning memory to build a habit, because habits live in a completely different part of your skull. Think about your own life. When you get into your car in the morning and back out of the driveway, do you consciously think about every single muscle movement? Do you calculate the exact pressure your foot applies to the brake, the alignment of your mirrors, the mechanical rotation of the key, and the estimation of distance between your bumper and the curb? No. The first few times you learned to drive, your brain was working at maximum capacity, flooded with stress and cognitive overload. But over time, that complex ballet of actions was handed down from your conscious prefrontal cortex to your automated basal ganglia. This neurological handover is a process scientists call chunking. The brain converts a sequence of individual actions into an automated routine. It does this because the brain is a notorious energy miser. Your brain represents only a tiny fraction of your body weight, but it consumes an enormous amount of your daily caloric energy. To survive, it is constantly looking for ways to conserve fuel. By turning a complex routine into an automated chunk, the brain can effectively power down its decision-making centers and coast on autopilot. But few people realize the massive danger hidden inside this evolutionary gift. Your basal ganglia is completely blind to morality. It cannot distinguish between a good routine and a destructive one. It doesn't know the difference between the automated routine of brushing your teeth and the automated routine of reaching for a cigarette when you feel stressed. Once a loop is encoded into the tissue of your basal ganglia, it stays there forever, silently waiting for the right environment to trigger its execution. This is why behavior change feels like a violent war against yourself. You aren't just fighting a lack of willpower, you are fighting an ancient biological machine designed to override your conscious mind. So, how do we hack this machine? To find the answer, we have to look at the exact anatomy of how an automated loop functions. Section 2. The three-step internal engine. In the laboratories of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology during the 1990s, researchers began placing tiny sensors inside the skulls of rats to monitor their brainwaves in real time. They placed these rats inside a T-shaped maze. At one end of the maze, behind a heavy partition, lay a piece of chocolate. The experiment would begin with a loud mechanical click, and then the partition would slide open. The first few dozen times a rat experienced this maze, its brainwaves exploded with frantic activity. As it wandered up the center aisle, sniffing at corners, scratching at the wooden walls, and turning the wrong way, its neurological readouts looked like a chaotic storm. The rat's brain was working at full throttle, processing every new scent, sight, and sound in the environment. But as the experiment was repeated day after day, a shocking shift occurred. The rat stopped making wrong turns. It stopped sniffing the walls. It began to sprint through the maze with mathematical precision. And as the behavior became perfectly efficient, the rat's brainwaves went completely quiet. The decision-making centers of the skull went totally dark. The rat had internalized the maze to such a degree that it no longer required conscious thought to find the reward. When the researchers analyzed the graphs of this automated behavior, they discovered that the brain spikes with intense activity at two precise moments, at the very beginning of the routine and at the very end. These two spikes are the brackets that hold an automated behavior in place. They revealed that every single habit in human life is governed by a fundamental three-step loop. But as the experiment was repeated day after day, a shocking shift occurred. The rat stopped making wrong turns. It stopped sniffing the walls. It began to sprint through the maze with mathematical precision. And as the behavior became perfectly efficient, the rat's brainwaves went completely quiet. The decision-making centers of the skull went totally dark. The rat had internalized the maze to such a degree that it no longer required conscious thought to find the reward. When the researchers analyzed the graphs of this automated behavior, they discovered that the brain spikes with intense activity at two precise moments, at the very beginning of the routine and at the very end. These two spikes are the brackets that hold an automated behavior in place. They revealed that every single habit in human life is governed by a fundamental three-step loop. Let's dissect how this loop operates in your everyday existence. Imagine you are working at your desk, and at exactly 3:30 p.m. every afternoon, you feel a sudden wave of restlessness. You stand up, walk down to the break room, and purchase a sugary snack and chat with your coworkers for 10 minutes. You walk back to your desk feeling recharged. You think you chose to take a break, but in reality, you are trapped in a three-step engine. The cue might be the time of day or a specific drop in your energy levels. The routine is the walk to the break room and the consumption of food. The reward is the temporary distraction from your tedious work and the social connection with your peers. But here is where most people get it wrong. When people want to change a destructive pattern, they usually throw all their energy into fighting the routine. They say, I am simply going to stop eating snacks at 3:30 p.m. They try to crush the behavior using sheer, raw willpower. But as we will see later, willpower is a fragile muscle that drains rapidly throughout the day. When you try to break a habit by attacking the routine alone, you leave the environmental cue raw and exposed, and you leave the internal craving completely unsatisfied. It is a statistical certainty that your discipline will eventually snap, and the old automated loop will reemerge with a vengeance. To truly master your behavior, you have to realize that habits never actually disappear. They are permanently etched into the pathways of your neural circuitry. If you have ever spent years away from a bicycle and then hopped onto one and ridden away effortlessly, you have experienced the permanency of the basal ganglia. The code cannot be deleted. It can only be overwritten. And to overwrite the code, you must discover the hidden chemical fuel that keeps the wheel spinning. You must understand the dark psychology of the craving brain. Section 3. The alchemy of cravings. In the early decades of the 20th century, an advertising wizard named Claude C. Hopkins was approached by an old friend with a financial proposition. The friend had invested in a new product, a minty, frothy paste designed to clean human teeth. He called it Pepsodent. At the time, selling toothpaste was considered economic suicide. The vast majority of Americans did not own a toothbrush, and nobody bothered to clean their teeth. Despite the fact that dental hygiene across the nation was collapsing due to the rise of processed, sugary foods, tooth cleaning was an obscure, non-existent practice. Dozens of previous marketers had tried to sell dental powders and liquids, and almost all of them had gone bankrupt. Hopkins initially turned the offer down. He couldn't see a way to educate millions of people on technical dental theories. But his friend persisted, appealing to Hopkins's immense ego, until the ad man finally agreed to launch a national campaign in exchange for a massive block of stock. Hopkins sat in a room filled with dry, tedious dental textbooks, reading for weeks, until he stumbled upon a brief reference to the naturally occurring mucus plaques that cover human teeth. Dentists called it a biofilm. Hopkins decided to call it the film. Suddenly, the wizard saw his catalyst. He didn't try to educate the public on the systemic dangers of tooth decay or the biology of cavities. Instead, he plastered cities with advertisements that read, "Just run your tongue across your teeth. You will feel a film. That film is what robs your teeth of their whiteness and invites decay. Millions are now using a new method to clear it away. Why let a dingy film hide your beautiful smile?" The brilliance of this strategy was its absolute universality. By telling people to run their tongues across their teeth, Hopkins was triggering an immediate, unskippable cue. Anyone who tried it felt the film. He then offered an obvious, seductive reward, a glamorous, beautiful smile. Within 5 years of launching the campaign, Pepsodent became one of the most profitable consumer goods on earth. Before Hopkins, only 7% of Americans had toothpaste in their medicine cabinets. A decade later, that number skyrocketed to 65%. Hopkins single-handedly established toothbrushing as a daily national ritual. But what happened next changed everything. Decades later, researchers at competing consumer goods firms began analyzing Pepsodent to figure out why it had completely dominated the market. They discovered something fascinating. The formula for Pepsodent included citric acid, mint oil, and synthetic chemicals. These ingredients did absolutely nothing to clean teeth more effectively. But they had an unexpected side effect. They created a sharp, cool, tingling sensation on the tongue and gums. When competitors ran surveys among Pepsodent users, they discovered that if a customer forgot to brush their teeth in the morning, they felt a profound sense of missing something. Their mouths felt dirty and warm. They weren't missing the clean teeth or the protection against cavities. They were missing the tingle. They had developed a neurochemical craving for that specific sensory payoff. Claude Hopkins believed his success was based entirely on the two classic rules of advertising: find a simple cue and define a clear reward. But he was wrong. He had accidentally stumbled upon a hidden third rule that powers the entire engine of automatic behavior. A cue and a reward on their own are not enough to create a lasting habit. The loop only becomes permanent when the sight of the cue triggers an intense subconscious anticipation of the reward. The cue must ignite a craving. To see what this looks like on a neurological level, we have to look into the modern laboratory of a neuroscientist named Wolfram Schultz at the University of Cambridge. Schultz was studying the dopamine pathways of primates. He placed a macaque monkey named Julio in front of a computer monitor. Whenever a specific colored shape flashed on the screen, Julio's job was to press a metal lever. If he pressed the lever correctly, a tube hanging from the ceiling would drop a single taste of delicious blackberry juice onto his lips. Initially, Schultz monitored Julio's brain and saw that dopamine, the chemical associated with pleasure and reward, spiked dramatically the exact moment the juice hit his tongue. The brain readout clearly stated, "I got a reward." But as Julio repeated the task thousands of times, the timing of that dopamine spike began to migrate. As the habit grew stronger, Julio's brain stopped lighting up when he tasted the juice. Instead, the massive wave of dopamine erupted the exact millisecond the shape flashed on the monitor, before the juice even arrived. The visual cue had become intertwined with the psychological expectation of the payoff. Julio's brain was anticipating the joy of the blackberry juice. Then, Schultz altered the parameters of the experiment. Julio would see the shape on the screen. He would press the lever, but the juice wouldn't arrive, or it would be delayed, or it would be watered down. When Schultz looked at the monitors monitoring Julio's brain during these moments, he saw a completely new neurological signature emerge, the signature of frustration and desire. When the cue appeared, Julio's brain lit up with anticipation. But when the reward was withheld, that anticipation curdled into a violent neurochemical drop, creating a howling deficit in his mind. Julio would screech, shake his chair, and become visibly depressed. This is the secret alchemy of addiction and habituation. When a gambler walks past a flashing slot machine, their brain doesn't wait until they win money to experience a dopamine high. The sight of the machine triggers an immediate, powerful anticipation of a win. If they play and lose, that craving turns into a painful deficit that can only be quieted by putting down another bet.
When you see a box of donuts on the office kitchen counter, your brain instantly anticipates the massive sugar high. If you choose to ignore it and walk away, the craving remains unfulfilled, torturing your focus for the rest of the morning. What this means for your life is profound. If you want to create a new, powerful routine, like waking up at 5 a.m. to run every single morning, you cannot just pick a cue and a reward. You have to cultivate a craving. You must choose a cue, like leaving your running shoes right next to your bed. And you must choose a clear reward, like a delicious smoothie or the psychological satisfaction of logging your miles. But crucially, you must allow your mind to obsessively anticipate that reward before you even lace up your shoes. You have to train your brain to crave the endorphin rush or the chemical payoff of that post-run routine. Until that craving is established, the behavior will feel like a tedious chore. Once the craving takes hold, the wheel will spin completely on its own. When you see a box of donuts on the office kitchen counter, your brain instantly anticipates the massive sugar high. If you choose to ignore it and walk away, the craving remains unfulfilled, torturing your focus for the rest of the morning. What this means for your life is profound. If you want to create a new, powerful routine, like waking up at 5 a.m. to run every single morning, you cannot just pick a cue and a reward. You have to cultivate a craving. You must choose a cue, like leaving your running shoes right next to your bed. And you must choose a clear reward, like a delicious smoothie or the psychological satisfaction of logging your miles. But crucially, you must allow your mind to obsessively anticipate that reward before you even lace up your shoes. You have to train your brain to crave the endorphin rush or the chemical payoff of that post-run routine. Until that craving is established, the behavior will feel like a tedious chore. Once the craving takes hold, the wheel will spin completely on its own. Dungy drilled his defensive players on a tiny handful of formations over and over again. Take a linebacker like Derek Brooks. Instead of forcing Brooks to look at 20 different things across the field to guess what the offense was doing, Dungy taught him to focus exclusively on a tiny set of visual triggers, known as keys. He told Brooks, look at the outside foot of the offensive lineman. If his toes are back, he's dropping into a pass block. If his shoulders are turned inward, he's opening a lane for a run. Don't analyze it, don't think about it, just execute your automated reaction. Dungy kept the visual cues the players had been looking at since high school. He delivered the exact same reward they had always craved, the primal thrill of a savage tackle or a game-ending interception. But he inserted a streamlined, lightning-fast routine in the middle. Because the players didn't have to think, they began to move with a devastating, terrifying velocity that opposing teams found impossible to stop.
Dungy completely transformed the Buccaneers, turning them into one of the winningest teams in the league and establishing a system that would eventually take them all the way to a Super Bowl victory. This exact same golden rule is the secret engine behind Alcoholics Anonymous. For decades, traditional medicine and psychiatry treated alcoholism as a moral failing or a purely chemical addiction. But the founder of AA, Bill Wilson, intuitively figured out a psychological truth long before neuroscientists could back it up with brain scans. AA doesn't succeed by simply telling alcoholics to stop drinking through sheer willpower. Instead, the program forces participants to complete a brutal, fearless self-inventory to map out their exact environmental cues and psychological rewards. When an alcoholic craves a drink on a Friday night, what are they actually chasing? Much of the time, the physical intoxication is the least rewarding part of the process. They are chasing a sense of relief from their anxieties, an escape from loneliness, a chance to relax, or the warmth of human companionship at a bar. AA keeps the exact same cues: stress, isolation, social anxiety, and it offers the exact same rewards: catharsis, relaxation, human connection, but it systematically inserts a new routine in the middle: going to a meeting, talking to a sponsor, and working through the 12 steps with a group of peers.
If you want to apply this to your own life, you have to approach your behavior like an experimental scientist. Imagine you want to quit a destructive late-night binging habit. You cannot just tell yourself to stop eating. You have to figure out what the true cue and reward are. When you walk to the kitchen at 11 p.m., are you actually physically hungry? Or is the cue boredom and the reward a temporary distraction before bed? If the reward is distraction, you must keep the cue of late-night restlessness, but insert a new routine, like reading an immersive fiction book or doing a 5-minute stretching routine that delivers the exact same psychological payoff of relaxation.
But here's where the system hits a massive roadblock. You can map your loops perfectly. You can experiment with rewards, and you can change your routines using the golden rule. Your habits will work beautifully when your life is smooth and calm. But what happens when tragedy strikes? What happens when you lose your job, your marriage collapses, or you find out a loved one is desperately ill? In moments of extreme high-stress crisis, the brain reverts to its oldest, deepest neural pathways. The new habits will drop away, and the old destructive loops will scream back to life. To make a behavioral shift truly permanent, you need one final elusive ingredient. An ingredient that Tony Dungy's players were missing during the critical playoff games of their early seasons. You need belief.
Section 5. The bedrock of true mutation.
For years, Tony Dungy's Tampa Bay Buccaneers would sail through the regular season with flawless, automated precision. But the moment they hit the high-stress crucible of the playoffs, everything would fall apart. Players would freeze, second-guess their training, and abandon Dungy's routines, defaulting back to their old, anxious ways of playing. Dungy realized that they trusted his system when things were easy, but when the pressure became overwhelming, they lacked the fundamental belief that his system would save them. The turning point for the team came out of an unspeakable personal tragedy. In 2005, while Dungy was coaching the Indianapolis Colts, his eldest son Jamie committed suicide. The team was completely devastated. When Dungy returned to the sidelines after the funeral, crushed by grief but still quietly grounded in his faith, his players looked at him and experienced a profound psychological shift. They saw a man standing tall in the darkest valley of human existence, anchored by a radical conviction. The players didn't just want to win for him anymore. They surrendered themselves completely to his vision. A deep, communal conviction emerged in the locker room. They stopped just practicing the routines. They started believing in the system and in one another. That year, under intense playoff pressure, their automated habits didn't break. They stayed completely fluid, and they won the Super Bowl. When researchers at the University of New Mexico began studying long-term sobriety among AA members, they discovered a matching pattern. Alcoholics who learned to swap their routines could stay sober for months, even years. But the moment an extreme life crisis hit, like a cancer diagnosis or a bitter divorce, those who relied purely on behavioral mechanics would almost always relapse. The individuals who stayed permanently sober were the ones who had developed a deep, unshakable belief that change was actually possible.
The scientists discovered that it wasn't the specific religious doctrine of AA that mattered. It was the psychological capacity for belief itself. If you can learn to believe that things will get better, that you have the power to overcome stress without your old vices, that conviction will act as an anchor for your new neural pathways. But how do you manufacture belief out of nothing when you feel broken and powerless? The answer is the community. Belief is a social contagion. It is almost impossible to sustain a radical personal transformation in complete isolation. When you enter a room where other individuals who used to be exactly like you are now standing tall, sober, healthy, or successful, your mind undergoes a structural shift. You look around the room and your subconscious says, if it worked for them, it can work for me. A group suspends your disbelief. A community validates your potential for change and holds your new identity in place when your personal willpower muscle goes completely limp. Transformation happens among other people.
Section 6. The Architecture of Corporate Metamorphosis. But personal transformation is only the beginning of this science. The exact same neurological rules that govern individual skulls also dictate the destiny of massive organizations, global corporations, and historical social movements. On a cold October morning in 1987, a legendary Wall Street investor took his seat in a posh Manhattan ballroom. He was surrounded by hundreds of prominent stock analysts and fund managers. They were there to meet the newly appointed CEO of the Aluminum Company of America, known as Alcoa. Alcoa was a massive, ancient industrial giant that manufactured everything from the metal in Coca-Cola cans to the bolts holding satellites together. But the company had been struggling, making strategic errors and losing its competitive edge. The investors were expecting a standard corporate speech. They expected the new CEO to talk about boosting profit margins, cutting operating costs, restructuring capital ratios, and firing inefficient workers. Instead, a trim, military straight man named Paul O'Neill stepped onto the stage and said, "I want to talk to you about worker safety. Every single year, numerous Alcoa employees are injured so badly that they miss a day of work. That is an unacceptable failure of leadership. I intend to make Alcoa the safest company in America. I intend to go for 0 injuries." The room fell into a stunned, horrified silence. An investor raised his hand and asked about the profit metrics for the aerospace division. O'Neill ignored him and said, "If you want to understand how Alcoa is doing, you need to look at our workplace safety figures. If our injury rates come down, it will be because the individuals at this company have agreed to become part of something important. They have devoted themselves to creating a habit of excellence." The moment the presentation ended, the investors practically stampeded out of the room. One fund manager sprinted to a lobby payphone, called his 20 largest clients, and yelled, "The board put a crazy hippie in charge, and he is going to kill the company. Order a sell on all Alcoa stock immediately before everyone else figures it out." It was the single worst piece of financial advice he would ever give in his entire career. By the time Paul O'Neill retired from Alcoa 13 years later, the company's annual net income had risen by 500%. Its market capitalization had exploded by $27 billion. And all that legendary wealth creation occurred while Alcoa became one of the safest places on the face of the earth. Some facilities went years without a single employee losing a single hour of work to an accident. How did a fanatical focus on worker safety create a historic profit machine? Because Paul O'Neill had discovered the power of a keystone habit.
A keystone habit is an overarching behavior that has the unique power to start a chain reaction across an entire system. Success does not depend on getting every single thing right all at once. It depends on identifying a single, high-leverage priority and transforming it into a powerful lever that forces all other routines to shift.
O'Neill knew he couldn't just order a massive, change-resistant corporate bureaucracy to suddenly become more efficient and profitable. The workers had spent decades fighting management, even burning effigies of executives in the parking lots during strikes. He needed a priority that everyone, from the lowliest factory hand to the highest vice president, could agree was morally valuable. Nobody wanted to argue against protecting human lives. But O'Neill's safety plan was modeled exactly on the three-step habit loop. The cue was a worker injury. He instituted an unbendable, automated routine. The moment an injury occurred anywhere in the world, the unit president had to file a detailed report to O'Neill within exactly 24 hours, alongside a precise plan to ensure it never happened again. The reward was professional advancement. The only managers who got promoted were the ones who met the safety metrics. To comply with this 24-hour rule, corporate vice presidents had to build instant, direct lines of communication with floor managers. Floor managers had to empower hourly workers to stop production lines immediately the moment they spotted a safety risk, without waiting for corporate permission. Workers had to build a habit of constantly suggesting operational fixes.
Suddenly, the rigid, toxic, slow-moving corporate hierarchy collapsed. In its place emerged a highly fluid, radically transparent network of real-time communication. And as the communication lines opened up to protect safety, workers started using those same lines to share brilliant manufacturing ideas. An employee who had been ignored for a decade suggested a new way to align the painting machines, and profits on aluminum siding instantly doubled. O'Neill attacked a single keystone habit, and the ripples of excellence rebuilt the entire company. We see this exact same dynamic in individual lives. When researchers study people who start habitually exercising just once a week, they find that a stunning chain reaction begins. The individuals don't just get in better physical shape, they automatically start eating healthier foods. They become significantly more productive at work. They show greater emotional patience with their families and colleagues. They use their credit cards less frequently, save more money, and report feeling drastically less stressed. Exercise is a keystone habit. It establishes a structural beachhead in your mind, making all other positive adjustments easier to achieve. Suddenly, the rigid, toxic, slow-moving corporate hierarchy collapsed. In its place emerged a highly fluid, radically transparent network of real-time communication. And as the communication lines opened up to protect safety, workers started using those same lines to share brilliant manufacturing ideas. An employee who had been ignored for a decade suggested a new way to align the painting machines, and profits on aluminum siding instantly doubled. O'Neill attacked a single keystone habit, and the ripples of excellence rebuilt the entire company. We see this exact same dynamic in individual lives. When researchers study people who start habitually exercising just once a week, they find that a stunning chain reaction begins. The individuals don't just get in better physical shape, they automatically start eating healthier foods. They become significantly more productive at work. They show greater emotional patience with their families and colleagues. They use their credit cards less frequently, save more money, and report feeling drastically less stressed. Exercise is a keystone habit. It establishes a structural beachhead in your mind, making all other positive adjustments easier to achieve.
Section 7. The Muscle of the Autonomous Will. What happens to a high school dropout inside a coffee shop reveals how a keystone habit can literally rebuild the structural anatomy of human discipline. Travis Leach grew up in a world of absolute chaos. His parents were functional heroin addicts. He grew up watching his father convulse on the kitchen floor from overdoses. He dropped out of high school at 16 to escape the brutal teasing of his peers.
He took entry-level jobs at fast food restaurants and video rental stores, but the moment a customer was rude or a manager shouted at him, Travis would completely lose control. He would scream, throw food, burst into tears, and walk out on his shift. He was utterly defenseless against the emotional storms of his environment. Then, Travis landed a job as a barista at Starbucks. Today, Travis is the executive manager of 2 massive Starbucks locations, responsible for millions of dollars in annual revenue and directing over 40 employees. He is never late. He has a booming retirement account and 0 debt. He is an oasis of calm and professionalism, even when a line of 50 angry customers is screaming for their morning coffee. The cookie eaters, who had used 0 willpower in the first room, sat down relaxed and worked on the puzzle for an average of 19 minutes before giving up. But the radish eaters, who had thoroughly exhausted their willpower reservoir by fighting the temptation of the cookies, were miserable. They muttered, slammed their pencils down, and quit after an average of only 8 minutes. This experiment sparked a revolution in psychology. It proved that willpower is not an immutable trait or a magical gift. Willpower is a finite biological resource, a muscle. If you exhaust that muscle early in the morning by fighting a tedious expense report or dealing with an annoying traffic jam, you will have 0 self-discipline left over in the evening when you walk past a box of cookies or try to force yourself to go to the gym. But like any muscle, your willpower can be systematically strengthened through targeted exercise. And Starbucks turned this science into an organizational machine. They realized that their employees failed at customer service when they hit predictable inflection points, moments of extreme stress where their raw willpower muscle went completely limp. A customer would start screaming because their latte was wrong, and an untrained worker would snap. So Starbucks gave their workers an automated script for these inflection points, a system called the latte method. We listen to the customer. We acknowledge their complaint. We take action by solving the problem. We thank them for their feedback. We explain why the problem occurred. The company printed workbooks with blank pages, forcing employees to write out exact behavioral plans ahead of time. Travis would sit in a back room and write down, "When an angry customer yells at me, my plan is to listen, apologize, and offer a free beverage voucher." They role-played these scenarios until the reaction shifted from an emotional defense mechanism into an automated habit. When the inflection point arrived, Travis didn't need to summon raw willpower to remain calm. His basal ganglia simply executed the pre-programmed script. The routine had become a shield. But here is the most crucial part of the science of discipline. In a follow-up study, researchers divided students into 2 groups for a willpower test. The first group was given harsh, tyrannical orders. You must not eat the cookies. Follow the instructions perfectly. They were treated like cogs in a machine. The second group was treated with profound kindness and autonomy. "We ask that you please don't eat the cookies. Is that okay? Thank you so much for volunteering your precious time to help us improve this science." When both groups were given the impossible puzzle, the students who had been ordered around like slaves quit instantly. Their willpower muscles had been completely drained by the friction of submission. But the students who had been given a sense of agency, choice, and control had willpower to spare. They persisted on the puzzle for the entire duration of the test. When you treat people like cogs, their capacity for self-discipline vanishes. But when you give them autonomy, when you give them a sense of control over their environment, their internal energy skyrockets. Starbucks stopped just giving baristas rules. They gave them the authority to redesign their workspaces, display merchandise, and customize their guest interactions. And as their sense of agency expanded, their loyalty, discipline, and performance hit historic highs. Section 8. The Predictors and the Puppeteers. As scientists learned more about habits, companies discovered powerful ways to predict and influence consumer behavior. One famous example comes from retail giant Target and data analyst Andrew Pohl. Target wanted to know if it could identify pregnant customers before they publicly announced it. Pregnant women were extremely valuable customers because major life changes disrupt old shopping habits and create opportunities for retailers to build new ones. By analyzing shopping data, Poll discovered that pregnant women often bought specific products at predictable stages of pregnancy. Unscented lotion, supplements, cotton balls, hand sanitizers, and washcloths appeared in recognizable patterns. Using about 25 products, Target created a model that could predict pregnancy and even estimate due dates. The strategy worked so well that Target accidentally revealed a teenager's pregnancy before her father knew about it. Realizing customers would feel uncomfortable if they knew how much data was being tracked, Target disguised pregnancy-related advertisements among random coupons for unrelated products. This camouflage made the marketing feel natural rather than invasive, helping drive enormous sales growth. A similar principle appeared in the music industry. When Outkast released Hey Ya in 2003, computer models predicted it would become a huge hit. Yet many listeners initially changed stations because the song sounded too different from familiar music. Radio programmers solved this by using a technique called playlist sandwiching. They placed Hey Ya between highly popular and familiar songs. The familiarity kept listeners tuned in long enough for the new song to become familiar. Eventually, it became a massive success. The lesson is simple. When introducing a major change into your life, wrap it inside existing habits. Keep familiar routines, environments, and schedules while gradually adding the new behavior. The mind accepts change more easily when it arrives disguised as something familiar. Radio programmers solved this by using a technique called playlist sandwiching. They placed Hey Ya between highly popular and familiar songs. The familiarity kept listeners tuned in long enough for the new song to become familiar. Eventually, it became a massive success. The lesson is simple. When introducing a major change into your life, wrap it inside existing habits. Keep familiar routines, environments, and schedules while gradually adding the new behavior. The mind accepts change more easily when it arrives disguised as something familiar. Section 9. The Anatomy of Social Revolutions. The power of habit extends beyond individuals and businesses. It can also fuel social movements that reshape history. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Although others had resisted before her, Parks's arrest sparked a movement that transformed America. Sociologists explain that successful social movements generally follow 3 stages: strong ties, friendship; to weak ties, peer pressure; to new habits of identity. The first stage begins with close relationships. Rosa Parks was deeply connected to many different social groups throughout Montgomery. When she was arrested, friends and community leaders quickly spread the news and organized a one-day bus boycott.
The second stage relies on weak ties, casual acquaintances, and broader social networks. News of the boycott spread across the city through churches, workplaces, newspapers, and community groups. People who barely knew one another joined together because they saw others participating. Peer pressure encouraged unity and commitment. However, peer pressure alone cannot sustain a movement indefinitely. As arrests, threats, and violence increased, participants needed something stronger. The final stage emerged through leadership. Martin Luther King Jr. transformed the boycott into a moral and spiritual mission. Drawing upon deeply rooted religious habits, he encouraged nonviolent resistance and forgiveness instead of retaliation. This gave participants a new identity. They no longer saw themselves merely as protesters, but as part of a larger historical and moral cause. Once people internalized this identity, the movement became self-sustaining and ultimately helped dismantle legal segregation.
Section 10. The Burden of Culpability. The science of habits raises a difficult question. If many behaviors are automatic, How responsible are we for our actions? The answer becomes clearer through two courtroom cases. The first involved Brian Thomas, a man who suffered from severe sleep disorders. During a sleep terror, he mistakenly believed an intruder was attacking his wife and fatally strangled her while unconscious. Medical experts proved that his conscious mind was completely inactive during the event. Because he had no awareness or control, the court found him not responsible for the tragedy. The second case involved Angie Bachman, a mother who developed a severe gambling addiction. What began as occasional entertainment eventually became an automatic habit. After inheriting nearly $1 million, she lost everything through compulsive gambling. Her lawyers argued that addiction had altered her brain and removed her ability to choose freely. Although scientific evidence showed powerful neurological influences, the court ruled against her.
Why were the outcomes different? Brian Thomas had no awareness that such a violent sleep behavior existed within him. He had no warning and no opportunity to intervene. Angie Bachman, however, knew her gambling habit existed. She had experienced bankruptcy, discussed the problem with her family, and understood the destructive pattern. This distinction reveals a central principle of habit science. Once you become aware of a habit, responsibility shifts to you. Habits may be automatic, but they are not permanent. When you identify the cue, routine, and reward driving a behavior, you gain the ability and the responsibility to change it. The process may be difficult and require planning, experimentation, support from others, but the habit can be rewritten. Your habits influence your future, but they do not determine it. Once awareness arrives, change becomes a choice.
As the legendary psychologist William James wrote in 1892, all our life, so far as it has definite form, is but a mass of habits, practical, emotional, and intellectual, systematically organized for our will or woe, and bearing us irresistibly toward our destiny. Your habits are the water you swim in every single day. They are the invisible tracks that guide your mind. But now, you have a flashlight and a crowbar. You know how the loop works. You know how to alter the gears. The only option left is to get to work. Thank you for listening to Liberty Listen. If this deep dive into the science of habit has shifted your perspective, please subscribe to the channel, give this video a share with someone who needs a breakthrough, and leave a comment below. Remember, you are the architect of your own mind. Design it with intention.